Hello, dear friends, and welcome to Sleep Stories TV. Tonight we delve deeper into our Greek mythology series with the origin of the Trojan War, the 12th chapter in our journey. A golden apple sparks discord, a prince's choice ignites love, and a city's doom looms on the horizon. If you haven't subscribed to Sleep Stories TV, join us now. Tap that bell and let no tale pass you by. Now settle in as we step into the myth where a single decision sets the world ablaze. Our story begins not on a battlefield, but at the most splendid wedding in the cosmos, where the mortal king Peleus married the sea goddess Thetis. The air shimmered with divine light, and the slopes of Mount Pelion glowed under the golden sun, as if the earth itself rejoiced in the union. Peleus, a hero of Thessaly, stood tall and proud, his mortal heart pounding with awe at the sight of his bride. Thetis, radiant as the ocean at dawn, her hair cascading like waves kissed by moonlight, moved with a grace that silenced the winds. This was no ordinary wedding. It was a rare moment when the mortal and divine worlds intertwined, a celebration so grand that the gods themselves descended from Olympus to bear witness. Zeus, the thunderer, presided over the feast with a benevolent smile, his eagle perched nearby, its eyes glinting with eternal vigilance. Hera, his queen, sat beside him, her peacock feathers fanning out like a tapestry of stars. Athena, sharp-eyed and serene, observed the gathering with the quiet confidence of wisdom incarnate. Apollo strummed his lyre, filling the air with melodies that made the flowers bloom brighter, while Artemis, ever aloof, watched from the edge of the festivities, her silver bow gleaming. Dionysus poured wine that sparkled like ambrosia, and the laughter of nymphs and satyrs echoed through the groves. The tables groaned under the weight of celestial delicacies, fruits that glistened like jewels, breads baked with the warmth of the sun, and nectar that tasted of eternity. Mortal guests, kings and heroes from every corner of Greece mingled with the divine, their voices a chorus of joy and wonder. Thetis's sea nymph sisters danced in swirling patterns, their laughter like the bubbling of hidden springs, while Peleus's warriors raised their cups, toasting to a future blessed by the gods. The air was thick with the scent of myrrh and roses, and the sky above seemed to pulse with the promise of harmony. This was a day meant to be eternal, a moment when the boundaries between earth and Olympus blurred, when love seemed to conquer even the fickle whims of fate. Thetis, though a goddess, had chosen a mortal, and in that choice there was a fragile beauty, a union that spoke of hope, of connection, of a world where gods and men could stand side by side. The guests marveled at the couple, Peleus with his weathered hands and earnest eyes, and Thetis, whose every glance carried the weight of the sea's mysteries. Their love was a bridge, a delicate thread binding the divine to the mortal, and for a fleeting moment, it seemed that nothing could shatter this perfection. The gods bestowed gifts upon the couple: golden armor from Hephaestus, a chariot drawn by immortal horses from Poseidon, and prophecies of a child who would surpass his father, whispered by the oracular voices of Delphi. The mortals, too, offered tributes: furs from distant lands, intricately carved spears, and vows of loyalty that rang with sincerity. The celebration stretched into the night, the stars above brighter than ever, as if even the heavens wished to honor this union. Laughter and music wove together, creating a tapestry of joy that wrapped the gathering in warmth. No one spoke of war or sorrow. No one imagined that this day so full of light could be the spark for a darkness that would consume nations. The wedding of Peleus and Thetis was a moment of unity, a rare pause in the endless dance of divine rivalries and mortal ambitions. It was a day when the world felt whole, when the gods smiled upon the earth, and when love seemed to hold the power to rewrite destiny. Yet beneath the surface, unseen by mortal eyes and unnoticed by the reveling gods, a shadow waited. A single absence, a forgotten name lingered like a storm cloud on the horizon. The seeds of chaos, though invisible now, were already sown, ready to burst forth and unravel the fragile harmony of this perfect day. For even in the heart of celebration, the gods are never far from their own nature, petty, proud, and perilously human in their desires. And so, as the music played and the wine flowed, the stage was set for a single act of vengeance that would echo through the ages, turning joy to ash and peace to war. All the gods were invited, except for one, Eris, the goddess of discord, whose presence no one wanted to spoil the celebration. As the wedding of Peleus and Thetis unfolded in its radiant splendor, the slopes of Mount Pelion pulsed with divine harmony, a fleeting illusion of unity among the Olympians. The laughter of Apollo, the serene wisdom of Athena, and the regal poise of Hera filled the air, while mortal guests marveled at the divine assembly, their hearts lifted by the grandeur of the moment. Yet in the shadows of this joyous gathering, a void festered, an absence that carried the weight of a brewing storm. Eris, the dark-winged goddess, was not among the revelers. Her name, synonymous with strife and chaos, had been deliberately struck from the guest list. To invite her, the gods reasoned, would be to court disaster. Her very essence was disruption, her laughter a prelude to conflict, her presence a spark that could ignite even the most sacred of bonds. Thetis, with her sea-born grace, and Peleus, with his mortal earnestness, deserved a day untainted by discord's touch, or so the Olympians believed. Zeus, ever cautious of divine tempers, had nodded in agreement when Hera suggested the omission, her eyes narrowing at the thought of Eris's sly grin, souring their festivities. Athena, too, had concurred, her strategic mind calculating the risks of inviting a goddess who thrived on division. Even Dionysus, usually carefree amidst his wine-soaked revels, had raised no objection, sensing that Eris's presence would taint the nectar's sweetness. The decision was unanimous, yet it was born of a dangerous arrogance, a belief that the gods could control fate, that they could banish chaos itself. Eris, however, was no mere deity to be ignored. She was the embodiment of strife, a force as old as the cosmos, born from the primal darkness of Nyx, the night herself. Her exclusion was not a quiet oversight. It was a wound, a deliberate slight, that cut deep into her divine pride. Far from the golden light of the wedding, Eris stood alone, her black eyes glinting with a cold, calculating fury. She was no stranger to rejection, yet this insult burned brighter than any before. The gods had gathered to celebrate love and unity, but in their refusal to acknowledge her, they had sown the seeds of their own undoing. Eris's lips curled into a smile sharp as a blade as she contemplated her revenge. She would not storm the feast with shouts or violence. Such crude displays were beneath her. Instead, she would craft a subtler weapon, one that would exploit the very flaws the gods believed they had transcended. Van 26F2 Vanity, pride, and envy. Her plan was as elegant as it was devastating, a single act that would ripple outward, shattering the fragile peace of the divine assembly. The wedding continued, oblivious to the gathering storm. Mortals raised their cups, toasting to the eternal bond of Peleus and Thetis, while the gods basked in their own glory, their laughter ringing through the groves. The music of Apollo's lyre wove a spell of joy, and the scent of roses mingled with the warmth of ambrosial wine. Yet Eris, unseen, was already weaving her own spell, her fingers tracing the edges of a plan that would turn celebration into catastrophe. She knew the Olympians better than they knew themselves, their jealousies, their rivalries, their insatiable need to be adored. To exclude her was to deny the truth of their own nature, and Eris would ensure they paid for that hubris. Her absence was a silent accusation, a reminder that chaos could not be banished, only delayed. The gods in their revelry had forgotten that harmony is fragile, that even the brightest moments carry shadows. Eris, with her unerring instinct for disruption, saw this truth clearly. She would not be forgotten. Her vengeance would be a masterpiece, a single act that would echo through the ages, turning the gods' pride against them. As the stars shone brighter above Mount Pelion, and the guests danced in blissful ignorance, Eris's heart burned with purpose. The wedding, so perfect in its illusion of unity, was merely the opening act. The true drama was yet to come, and Eris would be its author, her pen dipped in the ink of divine resentment. The gods had excluded her, but they could not escape her. She was discord itself, and her shadow would soon fall across their golden celebration, a harbinger of the chaos that would engulf both gods and men. Angered by the slight, Eris appeared at the feast and tossed a deadly gift among the guests, an apple of solid gold. The wedding of Peleus and Thetis, radiant with divine splendor, had reached its zenith, the air alive with laughter and the clinking of celestial goblets. The gods, draped in their shimmering robes, moved with effortless grace, their voices weaving a tapestry of joy that seemed unbreakable. Mortal kings and heroes, awestruck by the presence of Olympus's finest, raised their cups to the couple, their toasts echoing through the groves of Mount Pelion. Thetis glowed like the sea under a summer sun, and Peleus stood proud, his mortal heart swelling with a love that dared to touch the divine. Apollo's lyre sang sweeter than ever, its notes curling through the air like tendrils of light, while Dionysus ensured the wine flowed as freely as the rivers of ambrosia. The stars above burned brighter, as if the heavens themselves were celebrating this rare union. Yet in a single fleeting moment, the harmony shattered. A shadow flickered at the edge of the feast, unnoticed by the revelers, a presence that carried the chill of inevitability. Eris, the goddess of discord, stepped into the light, not with a thunderous arrival, but with the silent menace of a storm gathering on a clear day. Her black eyes gleamed with a cold, triumphant malice, her lips curved in a smile that promised ruin. She had been spurned, excluded from this grand assembly, her name erased from the guest list, as if she were a mere nuisance. But Eris was no petty deity to be dismissed. She was chaos incarnate, born from the primordial night, and her wrath was a force as old as the cosmos itself. The gods, in their arrogance, had believed they could banish her influence, that their celebration could remain untouched by strife. They were wrong. Eris, cloaked in shadow, moved with the grace of a predator, her gaze sweeping over the gathered deities, Zeus with his thunderbolt, Hera with her regal disdain, Athena with her piercing intellect, and Aphrodite whose beauty rivaled the dawn. Each of them in their pride had underestimated her, and now they would pay. In her hands she held her weapon, an apple forged of pure gold, its surface gleaming with an otherworldly light that seemed to pulse with malevolent intent. It was no ordinary fruit, but a masterpiece of divine craftsmanship, its weight heavy with the promise of division. Eris paused at the edge of the gathering, her presence a subtle discord in the symphony of joy. Then, with a flick of her wrist, she tossed the apple into the heart of the feast. It arced through the air, catching the light of the torches, a golden comet streaking across the divine assembly. It landed with a soft thud on a table laden with ambrosial delights, rolling to a stop amidst the laughter and music. The guests froze, their voices faltering, as their eyes fixed on the strange, radiant object. The apple's surface shimmered, drawing every gaze like a magnet, its beauty both alluring and unsettling. Whispers rippled through the crowd, mortals first, then gods, as curiosity gave way to intrigue. What was this gift unclaimed and unannounced? Who had sent it, and why? The music faltered, Apollo's fingers hesitating on his lyre, and even Dionysus paused, his goblet halfway to his lips. The golden apple lay there innocent in appearance, yet radiating a subtle menace that prickled the skin. It was as if the air itself had thickened the warmth of the celebration, cooling under an unseen shadow. The gods, ever sensitive to shifts in power, sensed the challenge before they understood it. Hera's eyes narrowed, her peacock feathers bristling as she leaned forward. Athena's brow furrowed, her mind already calculating the implications of this intrusion. Aphrodite, with a tilt of her head, studied the apple with a flicker of interest, her lips parting in a faint smile. The mortals less attuned to divine subtleties murmured among themselves, their awe tinged with unease. Eris, unseen, now retreated into the shadows, her work complete. She needed no grand proclamation, no dramatic confrontation. The apple was her voice, her vengeance, her chaos made manifest. It was a spark thrown into dry tinder, a single act designed to exploit the gods' greatest weakness, their pride. The celebration, so perfect moments before, now teetered on the edge of something darker. The golden apple gleaming under the torchlight was no mere gift. It was a weapon crafted to ignite jealousy, to stir vanity, to fracture the fragile unity of Olympus. As the gods and mortals stared at the apple, its surface seemed to whisper, promising glory to one and ruin to all. Eris's laughter, though unheard, echoed in the silence, a harbinger of the chaos to come. The wedding, once a beacon of harmony, was now the stage for a divine drama, and the golden apple was its catalyst, rolling inexorably toward a war that would shake the foundations of the world. Upon the apple was inscribed a single phrase, a challenge that could not be ignored for the fairest. The golden apple, gleaming like a fallen star amidst the wedding feast, had already drawn every eye, its radiant surface casting an almost hypnotic spell over the divine and mortal guests. The celebration of Peleus and Thetis moments ago, a symphony of laughter and music, now hung suspended, as if the air itself held its breath. The apple, tossed by the unseen hand of Eris, lay at the center of the banquet, its flawless curves reflecting the flickering torchlight, a silent intruder that commanded attention. The gods, with their immortal senses, felt the shift, first a ripple of tension that spread like a crack through fragile ice. Mortals less attuned, but no less curious, leaned closer, their murmurs growing, as they strained to understand the meaning of this strange gift. Then, as if drawn by an invisible force, Hera, queen of the gods, stepped forward, her regal bearing unbroken, but her eyes sharp with suspicion. She bent toward the apple, her peacock cloak trailing like a cascade of twilight, and her gaze fixed on the delicate inscription etched into its surface for the fairest. The words, simple yet insidious, seemed to pulse with a life of their own. Each letter a challenge, a taunt, a spark waiting to ignite. Hera's lips tightened, her divine pride stirring, as she straightened her presence, filling the space like a gathering storm. Athena, ever watchful, moved next, her owl-like eyes narrowing as she read the inscription, her mind already unraveling its implications. Her armor gleamed faintly, a reminder of her unyielding strength, yet even she could not resist the pull of those three words. Aphrodite, with a languid grace that belied her keen ambition, approached last. Her smile as radiant as the apple itself. Her beauty a living challenge to the inscription's claim. The phrase for the fairest was no mere dedication. It was a gauntlet thrown at the feet of Olympus's mightiest goddesses, a deliberate provocation crafted by Eris to exploit their deepest desires. The wedding's joy, so carefully cultivated, began to fray as the weight of those words settled over the gathering. The mortals, sensing the shift, fell silent, their toasts forgotten, their eyes darting between the goddesses, who now stood poised like statues around the golden prize. The air grew thick with unspoken questions: who was the fairest, who deserved the apple, and who would dare to claim it? Hera, with her commanding presence, saw the apple as a rightful tribute to her sovereignty, her role as queen of the gods, an undeniable testament to her supremacy. Her eyes, dark and imperious, flicked toward her rivals, daring them to challenge her claim. Athena, her mind a fortress of logic and strategy, viewed the apple as a test of her worth, her wisdom and martial prowess surely unmatched by mere beauty or power. Her fingers twitched, as if longing to seize the prize and prove her superiority. Aphrodite, however, saw the apple as a mirror of her essence, a confirmation of her unrivaled allure, her power to sway hearts and bend wills. Her laughter, soft and melodic, broke the tense silence, but it carried an edge, a subtle challenge to her sisters. The inscription had done its work, sowing seeds of envy and pride that took root in the hearts of the three goddesses. The other gods, sensing the brewing conflict, exchanged uneasy glances. Zeus, seated at the head of the feast, shifted in his throne, his thunderbolt resting idly in his hand, his expression unreadable. He knew better than to intervene, for the pride of goddesses was a force even he could not tame. Apollo's lyre lay silent now, its strings still, as if the god of music himself feared to disturb the mounting tension. Dionysus, ever the observer, sipped his wine, his eyes glinting with amusement, as if he alone foresaw the chaos this moment would unleash. The mortals, too, felt the weight of the moment, their awe giving way to unease as they watched the divine drama unfold. The golden apple, so small and yet so potent, had transformed the wedding from a celebration of love into a battleground of egos. Eris's genius lay in her simplicity. She had not needed armies or tempests to sow discord. A single phrase etched in gold was enough. The inscription, "For the fairest," was a mirror held up to the gods, reflecting their vanities, their insecurities, their insatiable need for supremacy. No goddess could ignore it, for to yield would be to admit inferiority, an unthinkable concession in the halls of Olympus. The apple, gleaming under the starlight, seemed to mock the gathered deities, its inscription, a whisper that grew louder with every passing moment. The feast, once a beacon of harmony, now teetered on the edge of division, the bonds of divine unity fraying under the weight of pride. Thetis and Peleus, the bride and groom, stood forgotten in the background, their love overshadowed by the growing storm. The golden apple, with its cruel inscription, had become the center of the cosmos, a prize that promised glory to one and humiliation to the rest. As the goddesses stood each poised to claim her right, the air crackled with the promise of conflict, a prelude to a war that would span years and consume nations. Eris, though absent, had triumphed, her vengeance a silent force that had already set the wheels of fate in motion. Instantly, the three most powerful goddesses stepped forward to claim the apple: Hera, the queen of the gods, Athena, the goddess of wisdom, and Aphrodite, the goddess of love. The golden apple, with its provocative inscription, "For the fairest," lay at the heart of the wedding feast, its gleam a silent challenge that had shattered the harmony of Peleus and Thetis's celebration. The air, once filled with the music of Apollo's lyre and the laughter of divine and mortal guests, now crackled with tension, as if the very stars above Mount Pelion held their breath. The apple, tossed by the vengeful Eris, had done its work, igniting the pride of Olympus's mightiest deities. Hera moved first, her presence commanding the attention of all, her peacock cloak shimmering like a twilight sky, each feather a testament to her sovereignty. As queen of the gods, her claim to the apple was unquestionable. In her mind, her beauty was not merely skin-deep, but woven into her divine authority, her right to rule alongside Zeus. Her dark eyes blazed with indignation, as if the very suggestion that another could rival her was an affront to the order of the cosmos. She stood tall, her voice low but resonant, declaring that the apple was hers by right, a symbol of her unchallenged dominion. The mortals watching in awe felt the weight of her gaze as if she could bend fate itself to her will. Yet before Hera's words could settle, Athena stepped forward, her movements precise, her armor glinting with the cold light of intellect. The goddess of wisdom and war needed no adornment to proclaim her worth. Her beauty was in her strength, her clarity of mind, her unyielding resolve. Her owl perched silently nearby fixed its unblinking eyes on the apple, as if it too understood the stakes. Athena's voice, calm but edged with steel, argued that true fairness lay in wisdom, in the ability to see beyond fleeting charms, to the enduring power of reason. The apple, she insisted, belonged to her, for who could be fairer than one who wielded knowledge as a weapon and strategy as a crown? Her presence was a challenge not just to Hera, but to the very notion of beauty as mere appearance. Then came Aphrodite gliding forward with a grace that seemed to soften the air itself, her golden hair catching the torchlight like a cascade of sunlight. The goddess of love needed no words to make her case. Her every movement was an argument, her smile a promise of delight that could sway even the hardest heart. Her eyes, bright with mischief and allure, lingered on the apple, as if it were a mirror reflecting her own essence. When she spoke, her voice was a melody weaving a spell that made the mortals' hearts race and even the gods pause. Beauty, she declared, was not power or wisdom, but the force that moved the world, the spark that kindled desire in gods and men alike. The apple was hers, she said, for she was beauty incarnate, the embodiment of all that the inscription demanded. The three goddesses stood in a tense tableau, their gazes locked, not on each other, but on the golden prize, each convinced of her own rightful claim. The wedding guests, divine and mortal alike, watched in uneasy silence, sensing the gravity of the moment. Zeus, seated at the head of the feast, shifted uncomfortably, his thunderbolt idle in his hand, his face a mask of calculated neutrality. He knew the danger of this dispute, the way divine pride could spiral into chaos. Yet he remained silent, his silence a shield against the storm he saw brewing. The other gods, too, held back, Apollo, his lyre forgotten, Dionysus, his wine untouched, Artemis, her silver bow taut with unspoken tension. The mortals, from Peleus himself to the humblest warrior, stood frozen, their joy replaced by a growing dread. The golden apple, so small and yet so potent, had become a fulcrum, a point on which the balance of Olympus teetered. Hera's claim was rooted in power, in the divine order she upheld as queen. Athena's was grounded in intellect, in the clarity and strength that defined her. Aphrodite's was born of passion, of the universal force of desire that she wielded with unmatched skill. None would yield, for to step back would be to admit defeat, to relinquish their place in the divine hierarchy. The inscription, for the fairest, had turned a simple gift into a battleground, a test of ego that no goddess could ignore. The feast, once a celebration of love, was now a stage for rivalry, the bonds of divine unity fraying under the weight of vanity. Thetis and Peleus, the bride and groom, faded into the background, their moment of joy eclipsed by the growing conflict. The apple, gleaming under the starlight, seemed to pulse with Eris's malice, its inscription a whisper that grew louder with each passing moment, fanning the flames of envy. The gods in their pride had fallen into the trap so cleverly, set their unity unraveling as the dispute took root. What had begun as a slight against a single goddess had now become a crisis that threatened to shake the heavens, a spark that would soon ignite a war among gods and men. The golden apple, with its cruel promise, stood as a testament to Eris's genius, a single object that had turned harmony into discord, setting the stage for a tragedy that would echo through the ages. To avoid trouble for himself, Zeus refused to be the judge and wisely declared that only a mortal man could make a fair decision. The wedding feast of Peleus and Thetis, once a radiant celebration of divine and mortal unity, had descended into a tense standoff, the golden apple's inscription for the fairest, igniting a firestorm of pride among Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite. The three goddesses stood like statues of unyielding will, their eyes fixed on the gleaming prize, each radiating a certainty that the apple was hers alone. Hera's regal authority crackled in the air, her peacock cloak a cascade of iridescent power. Athena's sharp intellect seemed to sharpen the very light around her, her armor glinting with the promise of victory. Aphrodite's beauty, soft yet unyielding, wove a spell that made the air itself seem to shimmer with desire. The other gods, sensing the gravity of the dispute, held their breath, their revelry silenced by the weight of divine egos clashing. Mortals from the noble Peleus to the lowliest warrior stood frozen, their awe tinged with fear as they watched the heavens teeter on the edge of chaos. The golden apple, small but impossibly potent, had transformed the joyous feast into a battlefield of pride, its inscription a challenge that no goddess could ignore. Yet amidst this mounting tension, all eyes turned to Zeus, the king of the gods, seated at the head of the assembly, his thunderbolt resting idly in his hand. His face, framed by a mane of storm-dark hair, was a mask of calculated calm, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. Zeus, who had tamed titans and shaped the cosmos, knew the peril of this moment. To choose one goddess would be to incur the wrath of the other two, a wrath that could shake Olympus itself. Hera, his wife, would not forgive a slight to her queenship, her jealousy a force that could rival his own thunder. Athena, his favored daughter, would see any rejection as a betrayal of her wisdom, her strategic mind already plotting retribution. And Aphrodite, with her power to stir hearts, could turn even his divine will against him. Zeus was no fool. He had ruled the heavens too long to fall into Eris's trap, to let a single decision fracture the delicate balance of his court. His silence as the goddesses' voices rose in heated argument was not indecision, but strategy. The wedding guests watched, waiting for his verdict, but Zeus raised a hand, his gesture commanding silence as surely as a thunderclap. His voice when he spoke was deep and measured, carrying the weight of the sky itself. This matter, he declared, is too delicate for the halls of Olympus. The gods are too close, too entwined in their affections and rivalries to judge fairly. Let a mortal unburdened by divine loyalties decide who is the fairest. The words hung in the air, a clever deflection that shifted the burden from his shoulders to the world below. The goddesses paused, their eyes narrowing, but none could argue with his logic. A mortal judge distant from the politics of Olympus would bear the consequences of the choice, leaving Zeus blameless. The other gods nodded, some with relief, others with suspicion, sensing the storm had merely been redirected, not dispelled. The mortals, too, exhaled their fear, mingling with curiosity. Who could possibly bear the weight of such a decision? Zeus's decision was a masterstroke born of centuries navigating divine tempers. He knew the apple, though small, was a spark that could ignite a conflagration, and he would not be the one to fan its flames. Yet in his wisdom he had also sown the seeds of a greater conflict, for the mortal world was not immune to the whims of gods. The feast, though still glittering with divine splendor, had lost its warmth, the laughter replaced by a hum of anticipation. Thetis and Peleus, the bride and groom, stood in the shadows, their love overshadowed by the drama unfolding before them. The golden apple, gleaming under the torchlight, seemed to mock the assembly, its inscription a silent taunt that had ensnared the mightiest of Olympus. Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite, though momentarily silenced by Zeus's decree, burned with unyielding determination, each certain that the mortal judge would see her as the rightful claimant. The other gods, from Apollo's quiet vigilance to Dionysus's amused detachment, sensed the ripples of Eris's vengeance spreading outward, touching not just the heavens, but the earth below. The wedding, meant to be a moment of eternal harmony, had become a turning point, a pivot on which the fate of gods and men would turn. Zeus's refusal to judge was not an end, but a beginning, a deferral of chaos that would soon spill over into the mortal realm. The golden apple, with its cruel promise, remained at the center of the feast, a symbol of discord that no divine decree could banish. As the stars above Mount Pelion shone on their light, seemed dimmer now, as if they too foresaw the tragedy that Zeus's cunning had only delayed. The stage was set, the players chosen, and the world waited for the mortal who would bear the weight of a divine decision, a decision that would ignite a war to shake the ages. The chosen judge was Paris, a prince of Troy, living in exile as a shepherd, who was famous for his impartiality. The wedding feast of Peleus and Thetis, once a beacon of divine harmony, had become a cauldron of tension, the golden apple's inscription, for the fairest, stoking the pride of Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite into a dangerous blaze. Zeus, with his thunderous authority, had deftly sidestepped the role of arbiter, declaring that only a mortal could judge such a delicate matter, his words redirecting the divine storm toward the earth below. The goddesses, their eyes still fixed on the gleaming apple, accepted his decree, with wary silence, their rivalry unquenched, but momentarily restrained. The other gods, from Apollo's watchful stillness to Dionysus's amused detachment, sensed the weight of this decision, knowing it would ripple far beyond the slopes of Mount Pelion. The mortals, awestruck and uneasy, whispered among themselves, wondering who could bear the burden of choosing between the mightiest deities of Olympus. Zeus, ever strategic, turned his gaze to the mortal world, his mind settling on a figure whose name carried whispers of fairness across the lands, Paris, son of Priam, king of Troy. Born a prince, Paris had been cast out at birth, a victim of a prophecy that foretold he would bring ruin to his city. Raised among shepherds on the slopes of Mount Ida, he had grown far from the gilded halls of Troy, his royal blood hidden beneath the dust of a pastoral life. Yet even in his exile, tales of his wisdom had spread how he settled disputes among herdsmen, with a clarity that seemed almost divine, how his judgments were unswayed by bribes or threats. His beauty, too, was spoken of, a radiance that rivaled the gods, his dark eyes sharp with an innocence that masked a restless heart. To Zeus, Paris was the perfect choice, a mortal untainted by the politics of Olympus, distant from the rivalries that simmered among the gods, and famed for a fairness that could perhaps withstand the weight fought of this divine contest. The king of the gods raised his hand, his voice booming across the feast, declaring Paris the judge who would decide the fate of the golden apple. The goddesses, though, still bristling with pride, nodded in agreement, each confident that her own virtues would sway this mortal's heart. Hera envisioned her regal splendor overwhelming him. Athena saw her wisdom dazzling his mind, and Aphrodite imagined her beauty ensnaring his soul. The wedding guests, both divine and mortal, felt the air shift as if the world itself had tilted toward a new destiny. Thetis and Peleus, their love now. A faint echo in the shadow of this drama stood silently, their celebration eclipsed by the looming judgment. On Mount Ida, far from the divine revelry, Paris tended his flocks, unaware of the role fate had thrust upon him. The sun dipped low, casting golden light across the rugged slopes, where the young shepherd moved with quiet grace, his staff tapping the earth as he guided his sheep. His life had been simple, defined by the rhythms of the seasons, the bleating of lambs, and the solitude of the hills. Yet even in this quiet existence, Paris carried a spark of something greater. A longing he could not name, a sense that his destiny lay beyond the pastures. The gods, with their unerring sight, descended upon him, their arrival, a sudden blaze of light that scattered his flock and set the air humming with divine power. Hera appeared first, her presence a storm of majesty, her crown gleaming as if forged from the stars themselves. Athena followed, her armor a quiet promise of strength, her owl perched on her shoulder, its eyes piercing the dusk. Aphrodite came last, her beauty a soft glow that warmed the chill evening air, her smile both a gift and a challenge. Paris, struck dumb by their splendor, fell to his knees, his shepherd's simplicity no match for the divine radiance before him. The golden apple held aloft by Hera caught the fading sunlight, its inscription, "For the fairest," a command that echoed in his heart. The goddesses spoke in turn, explaining the task he, a mortal, must choose, which of them deserved the apple, a decision that would crown one as the fairest in Olympus. Paris, his mind reeling, felt the weight of their gazes, each goddess, a force of nature, power, wisdom, love, each demanding his allegiance. The simplicity of his life, the quiet justice he had dispensed among shepherds, seemed distant now, a fragile shield against the divine storm that had descended upon him. The other gods, watching from Olympus, knew this moment was a pivot, a turning point that would bind the mortal and divine worlds in a shared fate. Zeus, his thunderbolt, still observed with a mixture of satisfaction and unease, knowing his deflection had spared him but imperiled the earth. The golden apple, small yet impossibly heavy, now rested in Paris's hands, its gleam a reflection of the choice that would shape the future. Eris's vengeance, so cleverly woven, had found its mark, her discord now a living force in the heart of a mortal prince. As Paris stood, the apple in his grasp, the world seemed to pause, the winds falling silent, the stars above flickering as if in warning. The shepherd prince, chosen for his fairness, was about to step into a role that would make him both a hero and a harbinger of doom, his decision, a spark that would ignite a war to shake the ages. Facing the young shepherd, each goddess offered an irresistible bribe, a prize that would shape his future and that of the world. Paris, the exiled prince of Troy, stood on the slopes of Mount Ida, the golden apple heavy in his hands, its inscription, "For the fairest," a challenge that had drawn the mightiest goddesses of Olympus to his humble pasture. The air shimmered with divine presence, the evening light bending around Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite as they stood before him, their radiance overwhelming the simple world of flocks and hills. Paris, raised as a shepherd, his royal blood, a secret even to himself, felt his heart pound, his mortal mind struggling to grasp the magnitude of the moment. The gods had descended, their power a tangible force that made the earth itself seem to tremble, and now they looked to him, a mere mortal, to judge their worth. The wedding of Peleus and Thetis far away on Mount Pelion was a distant memory now, its harmony shattered by Eris's cunning and Zeus's deft deflection. The golden apple gleaming in Paris's grasp was no longer just a prize but a fulcrum, a pivot on which the fate of gods and men would turn. The goddesses, each a vision of divine perfection, did not merely demand his choice. They sought to sway him, to bend his will with promises that glittered brighter than the apple itself. Hera stepped forward first, her presence a storm of regal authority, her peacock cloak rippling like a sea of stars. Her voice, resonant and commanding, carried the weight of empires. "Choose me, Paris," she said, her eyes locking onto his with the intensity of a queen who brooked no refusal. "And I will grant you power beyond mortal dreams. You will rule as a king not just of Troy, but of vast lands your name feared and revered across the earth. Armies will march at your command, cities will kneel, and your legacy will endure for generations. Her words painted a vision of grandeur, of thrones and scepters, of a world reshaped by his will. Paris, who had known only the simplicity of shepherd life, felt a stir of ambition, his heart quickening at the thought of such dominion. Yet before he could linger on the image, Athena approached, her armor gleaming with the cold clarity of dawn, her owl perched silently, its eyes like twin moons. Her voice was steady-edged with the precision of a strategist. "Choose me, Paris," she declared, her gaze piercing through him, as if reading the depths of his soul. "And I will give you wisdom and glory in battle. You will be unconquerable, a hero, whose name will echo in songs for eternity. With my guidance, no enemy will stand against you, no challenge will be too great. Your victories will be the stuff of legend." Her promise was not of fleeting power, but of enduring fame, of a life marked by triumphs that would outlast mortal years. Paris's mind, unaccustomed to such visions, reeled at the thought of becoming a warrior, whose deeds would rival those of the gods themselves. Then came Aphrodite, gliding forward, with a grace that softened the air, her beauty a living force that seemed to make the stars above burn brighter. Her eyes, warm and knowing, held Paris in a gaze that felt like a caress, her smile a promise of delights beyond imagining. "Choose me, Paris," she murmured, her voice a melody that wrapped around his heart. "And I will give you the love of the most beautiful woman in the world. She will be yours, her heart bound to you, her beauty, a joy that will fill your days with passion and light." Her words conjured an image of love so profound, so consuming, that it eclipsed thrones and battlefields. Paris, young and full of unspoken longings, felt his breath catch and his pulse racing at the thought of such a prize. The goddesses stood before him, their offers a triad of temptations, power, glory, love, each a path that would redefine his destiny. The golden apple, still in his hands, seemed to pulse with their promises, its weight a reminder of the choice that would bind him to one and make enemies of the others. The slopes of Mount Ida, once a place of quiet solitude, were now a stage for a divine drama, the air thick with the tension of gods awaiting a mortal's verdict. Paris, his shepherd's simplicity crumbling under the weight of their gazes, felt the world shift beneath him. He was no longer just a man tending flocks. He was a pivot point, a mortal whose decision would ripple through the heavens and the earth. The goddesses, though radiant, were relentless, their pride a fire that burned brighter than the setting sun. Hera's offer of power promised a life of dominion, but it carried the shadow of endless responsibility. Athena's gift of glory offered immortality through fame, but it demanded a life of conflict and sacrifice. Aphrodite's pledge of love was a siren's call, intoxicating and immediate, yet fraught with dangers Paris could not yet see. The other gods, watching from Olympus, knew the stakes of this moment, their silence a testament to the gravity of Paris's choice. Zeus, his thunderbolt, still observed with a mix of curiosity and dread, aware that his deflection had placed the fate of the world in the hands of a mortal, untested by divine intrigues. The golden apple, with its cruel inscription, was no longer Eris's alone. It was a weapon now wielded by Paris, its power to divide now resting in his trembling hands. As the goddesses waited, their eyes never leaving him, Paris stood poised between destinies, the weight of their promises pressing against his heart. The world, both mortal and divine, held its breath, for the shepherd prince's choice would ignite a spark that would set the heavens ablaze and plunge nations into war. Driven more by youthful passion than by an ambition for power, Paris awarded the golden apple to Aphrodite. The slopes of Mount Ida, bathed in the fading light of dusk, stood witness to a moment that would alter the course of the world. Paris, the exiled prince of Troy, raised as a shepherd, held the golden apple in his trembling hands, its inscription for the fairest, a challenge that had summoned the mightiest goddesses of Olympus to his humble pasture. Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite stood before him, their divine radiance casting long shadows across the rugged hills, each goddess, a vision of power, wisdom, and beauty. The air was thick with their presence, the weight of their promises, power, glory, love pressing against Paris's heart like a storm waiting to break. He was no longer just a shepherd. He was a mortal, caught in a divine crucible, his decision destined to ripple through the heavens and the earth. Hera's offer of dominion had stirred his imagination, painting visions of thrones and empires, of a name that would echo across nations. Her regal gaze, fierce and unyielding, promised a life of authority, but it was a cold, heavy promise, one that demanded a ruler's resolve, a weight Paris in his youth could scarcely fathom. Athena's pledge of wisdom and glory in battle had sparked a different fire, one of heroic deeds and eternal fame. Her piercing eyes, sharp with intellect, offered a path to immortality through triumphs that would outlast mortal flesh, yet it was a path paved with conflict, a life of endless struggle that seemed distant from the quiet hills he knew. Then there was Aphrodite, her beauty, a living force that softened the air, her smile a melody that sang to the deepest corners of his soul. Her promise, the love of the most beautiful woman in the world, had set his heart ablaze, its allure immediate, intoxicating, irresistible. Paris, young and full of unspoken longings, felt his pulse quicken as he gazed at her. Her eyes holding a warmth that seemed to promise not just love, but a life filled with joy and passion. The golden apple gleaming in his hands seemed to pulse with her presence, its weight no longer a burden, but a key to a dream he could not release. The goddesses watched him, their silence a storm of anticipation, their pride a fire that burned brighter than the setting sun. Hera stood like a queen awaiting coronation, her peacock cloak shimmering with the certainty of her claim. Athena, her armor glinting, exuded a calm confidence, as if her wisdom were an undeniable truth. Aphrodite, however, needed no words. Her very presence was an argument, her beauty a force that bent the world to her will. Paris, caught in the crossfire of their gazes, felt the weight of his mortality, his heart torn between ambition and desire. He was no king, no warrior, no sage, only a young man, his life shaped by the simplicity of shepherds' disputes and the solitude of Mount Ida's slopes. Yet now the fate of gods and men rested in his choice, and he knew it. His mind flickered to the tales he had heard of heroes who chose glory and kings who wielded power. But those stories felt distant, like echoes from a world he had never known. Aphrodite's promise, though, was immediate, vivid, alive. It spoke to the fire in his chest, the yearning that had stirred in him under countless starlit nights. He saw her face, not just the goddess before him, but the woman she promised, a beauty so profound it could eclipse empires and outshine victories. His decision was not born of logic or strategy, but of a passion that burned brighter than reason, a choice as human as it was reckless. With a trembling breath, Paris stepped forward, the golden apple raised in his hands. The goddesses leaned closer, their eyes locked on him, the air crackling with the weight of their expectations. He turned to Aphrodite, his voice steady but soft, as if speaking a truth he had always known. "To you, goddess of love," he said, placing the apple at her feet, "for you are the fairest." The words hung in the air, a verdict that seemed to still the world. Aphrodite's smile bloomed radiant and triumphant, her eyes gleaming with a warmth that enveloped Paris like a summer dawn. Hera's face darkened, her regal composure fracturing into a scowl of barely contained fury, her hands clenching as if to summon storms. Athena's eyes narrowed, her calm shattered by a cold, calculating anger, her mind already weaving plans for retribution. The slopes of Mount Ida, once a place of quiet solitude, now bore witness to a moment that would echo through the ages. The other gods watching from Olympus felt the shift, a ripple that spread from the mortal world to the heavens. Zeus, his thunderbolt, still sensed the storm. He had delayed, now gathering strength. His deflection no longer a shield, but a spark. The golden apple, now in Aphrodite's hands, gleamed with a light that seemed to mock the defeated goddesses, its inscription a taunt fulfilled. Paris, his heart still racing, with the thrill of his choice, could not see the consequences, unfolding the enmity he had ignited, the divine wrath that would soon descend upon his city. The wedding of Peleus and Thetis, far away, was now a distant memory, its joy buried beneath the weight of this decision. Aphrodite's promise, though sweet, was a double-edged sword, its allure a trap that would ensnare not just Paris, but all of Troy. The golden apple, once Eris's weapon, was now the catalyst for a greater tragedy, its gleam a harbinger of the war that would consume gods and men alike. As the goddesses vanished, their presence fading into the twilight, Paris stood alone, the weight of his choice settling over him like a shadow. His heart still caught in the glow of Aphrodite's smile, unaware of the darkness it would unleash. That decision won him the favor of the goddess of love, but it also planted an eternal hatred for him and all of Troy in the hearts of Hera and Athena. The slopes of Mount Ida, where Paris had stood moments before, the golden apple gleaming in his hands, were now cloaked in twilight, the air heavy with the weight of his choice. He had awarded the apple to Aphrodite, her radiant smile and promise of love eclipsing the offers of power and glory from her rivals. The goddess of love, her eyes alight with triumph, accepted the prize with a grace that seemed to make the stars above burn brighter, her presence a warm glow that enveloped Paris, filling his heart with a fleeting sense of victory. Her laughter, soft and melodic, echoed across the hills, a sound that promised joy but carried an undercurrent of inevitability, as if the world itself knew the cost of her favor. Paris, young and swept away by passion, stood in awe, his shepherd's simplicity no match for the divine allure that now bound him to her. Yet as Aphrodite's light faded into the dusk, the air grew colder, charged with a darker energy. Hera and Athena, spurned by the mortal's verdict, stood like twin pillars of divine wrath, their faces etched with a fury that could shake the heavens. Hera, the queen of the gods, her peacock cloak no longer shimmering, but bristling with indignation, fixed Paris with a gaze that could have turned stone to ash. Her pride, the bedrock of her sovereignty, had been wounded, and her anger was a storm gathering on the horizon, vast and unyielding. She was no mere goddess to be slighted. She was the consort of Zeus, the guardian of divine order, and this insult delivered by a mortal no less cut deeper than any blade. Her voice when she spoke was low, a rumble like distant thunder. "You have chosen poorly, shepherd," she said, her words a vow that carried the weight of eternity. "Troy will pay for your folly, and your name will be a curse." Athena, the goddess of wisdom and war, stood beside her, her armor glinting with a cold, unyielding light, her owl's eyes piercing the gathering dark. Her anger was not loud, but precise, a blade honed by intellect and sharpened by betrayal. She had offered Paris glory, the chance to etch his name in the annals of heroes, yet he had spurned her for fleeting passion. Her voice, sharp and measured, cut through the silence. "You have rejected wisdom, mortal," she declared, "and in doing so you have invited ruin. Troy will know no peace, and your choice will be its undoing." The goddess's words were not mere threats, but prophecies, their divine will, a force that could bend fate itself. Paris, still caught in the glow of Aphrodite's promise, felt a chill creep into his bones, the first stirrings of doubt in his heart. The golden apple, now in Aphrodite's hands, seemed to pulse with a light that mocked the defeated goddesses, its inscription, "For the fairest, a taunt," that had ignited their wrath. The other gods watching from Olympus sensed the shift, the harmony of the heavens fracturing under the weight of this mortal's decision. Zeus, his thunderbolt, still observed with a heavy silence, knowing his deflection had spared him but doomed another. The wedding of Peleus and Thetis far away on Mount Pelion was now a distant memory, its joy buried beneath the consequences of Eris's vengeance. Hera and Athena, their pride wounded, turned their gaze not just on Paris, but on all of Troy, the city that had birthed him. Their hatred was not fleeting, but eternal, a divine grudge that would not rest until the walls of Troy lay in ruins. Hera, with her power over the divine order, saw Troy as a symbol of mortal hubris, a city that dared to harbor the one who had insulted her. Athena, with her strategic mind, envisioned the fall of Troy as a lesson, a warning to all who would choose passion over wisdom. Together, their resolve was a force as relentless as the tides, as unyielding as the mountains. The mortal world, unaware of the storm brewing in the heavens, continued its rhythms, but the gods knew better. The golden apple, once a spark of discord, was now a beacon of war, its gleam a harbinger of the destruction to come. Paris, standing alone on Mount Ida, felt the weight of his choice settle over him, though he could not yet grasp its full magnitude. Aphrodite's favor was a sweet promise, but it came at a cost he could not yet see, a cost that would be paid in blood and fire. The goddess's wrath, though directed at him, extended beyond him, enveloping his city, his people, his future. Troy, with its towering walls and bustling markets, stood oblivious, its fate now tied to a shepherd prince who had chosen love over power and wisdom. The other gods, from Apollo's quiet vigilance to Dionysus's amused detachment, knew the die had been cast. The golden apple, with its cruel inscription, had fulfilled Eris's purpose, turning a moment of divine rivalry into a catalyst for mortal tragedy. As Hera and Athena vanished, their anger a lingering shadow. Paris stood under the starlit sky, the echo of Aphrodite's laughter still in his ears. He was no longer just a shepherd, nor even a prince, but a figure at the heart of a divine vendetta, his choice a spark that would ignite a war to shake the ages. The world, both mortal and divine, had shifted, and the consequences of his decision were already weaving their way into the fabric of fate, a thread that would lead inexorably to the fall of Troy. And the most beautiful woman in the world, whom Aphrodite had promised, was none other than Helen, who unfortunately was already the wife of Menelaus, king of Sparta. The slopes of Mount Ida, where Paris had made his fateful choice, now lay quiet under a starlit sky, the echoes of divine voices fading into the night. Paris, the shepherd prince of Troy, stood alone, his heart still warm with the glow of Aphrodite's smile. Her promise of love a fire that burned brighter than the golden apple he had placed in her hands. The goddesses, Hera and Athena, had vanished, their wrath a lingering shadow that cast a chill over the hills, their vows of vengeance against Troy already weaving into the fabric of fate. The golden apple, with its inscription, "For the fairest," had fulfilled Eris's cruel design, transforming a moment of divine rivalry into a spark that would ignite a war to shake the ages. Paris, unaware of the storm he had unleashed, felt only the thrill of Aphrodite's favor, her words echoing in his mind, the love of the most beautiful woman in the world. That promise, so sweet and intoxicating, was a beacon in his heart, a vision of joy that seemed to outshine the thrones and glories offered by her rivals. Yet, as the stars wheeled above their light, cold and distant, the true nature of Aphrodite's gift began to reveal itself not as a simple blessing, but as a Pandora's box, its contents as perilous as they were alluring. The woman Aphrodite had promised was Helen, a name that carried the weight of legend, a beauty so profound it was said to rival the gods themselves. Her face whispered about in every corner of Greece was a marvel that could still the hearts of kings and spark poetry in the mouths of bards. Her hair golden as the sun framed eyes that held the depth of the sea, and her presence was a melody that lingered in the air long after she had passed. Helen was no mere mortal. She was a daughter of Zeus, born of Leda, her divine lineage a spark that set her apart from all others. Yet this radiant woman was not free to be claimed. She was the wife of Menelaus, king of Sparta, a warrior king whose strength and honor were renowned across the lands. Their marriage, celebrated in the halls of Sparta, was a bond sealed not just by love but by the intricate web of alliances that bound the Greek kings together. Helen's beauty had drawn suitors from every corner of Greece, each vying for her hand, but Menelaus had won her his devotion, as unyielding as the walls of his city. To Paris. Helen was a dream, a vision conjured by Aphrodite's promise, but to Menelaus she was a treasure, a queen, a wife whose honor was his own. Aphrodite's gift, though dazzling, was no simple prize. It was a spark thrown into dry tinder, a promise that carried the seeds of conflict. Paris, standing alone on Mount Ida, could not yet see the consequences of his choice, the way it would entangle him in a web of divine and mortal loyalties. The golden apple, now in Aphrodite's hands, had shifted from a symbol of beauty to a harbinger of chaos, its gleam a reflection of the turmoil to come. The other gods, watching from Olympus, sensed the unfolding tragedy, their silence heavy with the knowledge of what Paris's decision would unleash. Zeus, his thunderbolt, still knew that his deflection of the judgment had not quelled the storm, but merely redirected it, its fury now aimed at the mortal world. Hera and Athena, their hatred for Paris and Troy, burning brighter than ever, saw in Helen's promised love a chance to fuel their vengeance, a way to turn Aphrodite's triumph into a curse. The wedding of Peleus and Thetis, once a beacon of harmony, was now a distant memory, its joy buried beneath the weight of divine machinations. Helen, far away in Sparta, lived unaware of the role she would play, her beauty a light that had unwittingly drawn the gaze of gods and men alike. To Paris, she was the embodiment of Aphrodite's promise, a vision of love that filled his heart with longing. But to the world, she was a catalyst, a figure whose very existence would draw nations into conflict. The golden apple, with its cruel inscription, had set this chain in motion, its power to divide now reaching beyond the heavens to the earth below. Paris, still a shepherd in his heart, could not yet grasp the magnitude of what he had set in motion, the way his choice would ripple outward, touching not just his life, but the lives of countless others. The gods, with their immortal sight, saw the path ahead, cities burning, heroes falling, a war that would span a decade and leave scars on the world. Aphrodite's promise, though sweet, was a double-edged sword, its blade hidden in the glow of her smile. Helen, the most beautiful woman in the world, was not just a prize but a spark, a flame that would ignite the ambitions and grudges of gods and men. As Paris stood under the stars, his thoughts filled with visions of a woman he had never seen, the world turned quietly toward its fate. The golden apple's legacy, now a shadow that stretched from Mount Ida to the walls of Troy and beyond, to the shores of Sparta, where a king and his queen lived, in blissful ignorance of the storm that was coming. Matters were further complicated by an old oath in which all the kings of Greece had once sworn to protect Helen's marriage at any cost. The slopes of Mount Ida, where Paris had chosen Aphrodite, and her promise of Helen's love now lay silent under a starlit sky. But the echoes of his decision reverberated far beyond the hills, reaching into the halls of power across Greece. The golden apple its inscription for the fairest. Now a fulfilled prophecy of discord had set in motion a chain of events that would bind gods and men in a web of fate. Paris, still a shepherd in his heart, stood alone, his mind filled with visions of Helen, the most beautiful woman in the world, unaware that her beauty was not just a prize but a spark that would ignite a conflagration. Aphrodite's favor, though sweet, was a poisoned gift for Helen, was no free maiden, but the wife of Menelaus, king of Sparta, a man whose honor was as unyielding as his city's walls. The goddess of love, with her radiant smile, had promised Paris a love that would eclipse all others, but she had not spoken of the consequences, the intricate web of alliances that made Helen's marriage a linchpin of Greek unity. Long before Paris's birth, before the golden apple had ever gleamed in Eris's hands, Helen's beauty had drawn the mightiest kings of Greece to her father's palace in Sparta. Tyndareus, her mortal father, faced a dilemma: how to choose a husband for a woman whose suitors included the greatest warriors and rulers of the age. Odysseus of Ithaca, cunning and wise. Ajax, a towering giant of strength. Agamemnon, lord of Mycenae, whose ambition rivaled the gods. And Menelaus, steadfast and honorable, whose love for Helen burned with quiet intensity. Each suitor brought wealth, power, and the promise of alliance, but Tyndareus knew that choosing one would make enemies of the rest, risking war among the fractious Greeks. It was Odysseus, ever the strategist, who proposed a solution, a pact that would bind the suitors in peace rather than rivalry. Before Helen's husband was chosen, he urged them to swear an oath, a sacred vow sealed in blood and witnessed by the gods. Whoever won Helen's hand would have her marriage protected by all, and any who sought to take her would face the combined might of Greece. The kings, their pride tempered by the weight of the moment, agreed, raising their swords and swearing their loyalty, their voices a chorus that echoed through the halls of Sparta. The oath, known as the Oath of Tyndareus, was a chain forged of honor and ambition, binding the Greek lords together in a fragile unity. Menelaus, chosen as Helen's husband, stood proud, his love for her a beacon that seemed to promise peace, unaware that the oath would one day be a call to war. Now, years later, as Paris stood on Mount Ida, the consequences of his choice began to ripple outward, touching the distant shores of Sparta, where Helen and Menelaus reigned. Aphrodite's promise, though born of divine will, clashed with the mortal bonds of marriage and the sacred oath that protected it. Helen was not just a woman. She was a symbol, a prize whose theft would be an affront to every king who had sworn to defend her. The golden apple, once a spark of divine rivalry, had now become a catalyst for mortal conflict, its gleam a reflection of the chaos to come. Hera and Athena, their hatred for Paris and Troy burning brighter than ever, saw in this promise an opportunity to fuel their vengeance, to turn Aphrodite's triumph into a curse that would bring ruin to the city that harbored Paris. The other gods, watching from Olympus, sensed the gathering storm, their silence heavy with the knowledge of what was to come. Zeus, his thunderbolt, still knew that his deflection of the judgment had not quelled the discord, but merely redirected it, its fury now aimed at the mortal world. The wedding of Peleus and Thetis, a distant memory of harmony, was now overshadowed by the looming specter of war. In Sparta, Helen moved through her days unaware of the divine machinations that had set her at the center of a cosmic drama. Her beauty, a gift and a curse, was a light that drew the gaze of gods and men alike, a force that had already shaped the destinies of nations. Menelaus, her husband, ruled with a steady hand, his love for her a constant that anchored his kingdom. Yet the oath of Tyndareus, sworn in a time of peace, now hung over Greece like a sword, its promise of unity a double-edged blade that could just as easily draw blood. Paris, still dreaming of the woman Aphrodite had promised, could not yet see the web he was about to unravel, the way his pursuit of Helen would call forth the might of Greece's kings, each bound by honor to defend Menelaus's claim. The golden apple, with its cruel inscription, had woven a thread that connected Mount Ida to Sparta, Troy, to Greece, a single choice to a war that would span a decade. The gods, with their immortal sight, saw the path ahead, cities burning, heroes falling, a conflict that would leave scars on the world. Paris, a prince disguised as a shepherd, stood at the heart of this unfolding tragedy, his heart filled with longing, his fate now tied to a woman whose beauty would be both his salvation and his doom. The oath of Tyndareus, a pact meant to preserve peace, was now a chain that would pull nations into war, all because of a golden apple and a mortal's choice. With Aphrodite's help, Paris traveled to Sparta, violated the sacred laws of hospitality, and seduced or abducted Helen, taking her and her treasures back to Troy. The slopes of Mount Ida, where Paris had chosen Aphrodite, and her promise of love now lay far behind him, a distant memory of a moment that had set the world on a collision course with fate. The golden apple, its inscription for the fairest, a spark that had ignited divine rivalries, had fulfilled its purpose, drawing Paris into the orbit of Aphrodite's will. The goddess of love, her radiant smile a beacon in his heart, had not abandoned her chosen mortal. With a whisper of divine guidance, she set his path toward Sparta, her power cloaking him in a charm that made the winds favor his sails and the seas part before his ship. Paris, once a shepherd prince tending flocks, was now a man transformed, his royal blood stirring as he embraced his destiny. The promise of Helen, the most beautiful woman in the world, burned in his mind, her image a vision that eclipsed the warnings of doubt that flickered in his heart. He was no longer just a man. He was Aphrodite's instrument, a mortal bound to a divine promise that carried the weight of war. The journey to Sparta was swift, guided by the goddess's unseen hand, the skies clear and the stars bright, as if the heavens themselves conspired to hasten his arrival. When he stepped onto Spartan soil, Paris was no longer the humble shepherd of Mount Ida, but a prince of Troy, his beauty rivaling the gods, his presence imbued with a charisma that drew every eye. Menelaus, king of Sparta, welcomed him with open arms, his hospitality a sacred bond in the Greek world, where guests were treated as kin, under the watchful eyes of Zeus Xenios, protector of strangers. The halls of Sparta, gleaming with bronze and adorned with tapestries, echoed with the warmth of feasting, the clink of goblets, and the laughter of warriors. Helen the queen moved through the halls like a living flame, her beauty a marvel that silenced conversation and stilled hearts. Her golden hair caught the torchlight, her eyes held the depth of the sea, and her voice was a melody that lingered in the air. Paris, seeing her for the first time, felt his breath catch, his heart confirming what Aphrodite had promised. This was the woman who would be his, the embodiment of love itself. Yet Helen was not just a prize to be claimed. She was Menelaus's wife, the heart of Sparta, and the linchpin of the oath of Tyndareus, which bound the kings of Greece to her marriage. Paris, swept away by passion, saw only her beauty, not the consequences of his desire. Aphrodite's influence, subtle but relentless, wove a spell around him, clouding his judgment, urging him to act on the fire in his heart. Whether by seduction or abduction, tales would later differ. The sacred laws of hospitality were shattered. In the quiet of a starlit night, Paris took Helen, her treasures in tow, and fled Sparta, the goddess's power, smoothing their escape across the sea to Troy. The act was not just a theft of love, but a violation of a sacred trust, an insult to Menelaus, to Sparta, and to the gods who guarded the bonds of guest and host. Helen, whether willingly swept away by Paris's charm or taken against her will, became a figure caught between mortal passion and divine machination, her beauty a catalyst for chaos. The treasures of Sparta, golden cups, woven tapestries, jewels that gleamed like stars were carried aboard Paris's ship, a further affront to Menelaus's honor. As the shores of Sparta faded into the distance, the winds of Aphrodite's favor carried them to Troy, the city's towering walls rising like a promise of safety. Yet the gods above watched with heavy silence their immortal sight, seeing the storm that Paris's actions had unleashed. Hera and Athena, their hatred for Paris and Troy, burning brighter than ever, saw in this act the perfect fuel for their vengeance. The golden apple, now a distant memory, had done its work, its discord spreading from the heavens to the earth, from a divine feast to a mortal kingdom. Zeus, his thunderbolt, still knew the consequences of Paris's choice were now inescapable, the oath of Tyndareus, a chain that would pull Greece into war. In Troy, Paris arrived with Helen, presenting her to his father King Priam and his mother Hecuba as a prize won by divine favor. The city, unaware of the doom that followed in her wake, marveled at her beauty, their pride swelling at the thought of such a treasure within their walls. Yet the gods knew better. Aphrodite's promise, though fulfilled, was a double-edged sword, its blade hidden in the joy of Paris's triumph. The violation of hospitality, a sin in the eyes of both gods and men, was a spark that would ignite the oath of Tyndareus, calling forth the kings of Greece to reclaim what had been stolen. The wedding of Peleus and Thetis, once a beacon of harmony, was now a forgotten prelude to a tragedy that would span a decade. Helen, standing beside Paris in the halls of Troy, was no longer just a woman, but a symbol, a spark, that would draw armies across the sea. The golden apple, with its cruel inscription, had woven a thread that connected Mount Ida to Sparta to Troy, a single act of passion, now a prelude to war. As Paris and Helen stood together, their love a fleeting moment of light, the shadows of Hera and Athena loomed large. Their vengeance, a storm that would soon break over Troy, its walls destined to crumble under the weight of a mortal's choice and a goddess's promise. When Menelaus returned and discovered the betrayal, he called upon his brother Agamemnon and all the Greek kings to fulfill their oath. The ships began to gather, and a 10-year war was about to begin, all for a golden apple. The halls of Sparta, once filled with the warmth of feasting and the light of Helen's presence, now stood cold and empty, their silence a stark contrast to the joy that had defined them. Menelaus, king of Sparta, had been away, perhaps on a journey to strengthen alliances or honor the gods, trusting in the sacred bonds of hospitality to protect his home. But upon his return, he found his palace desecrated, his queen gone, and his honor shattered. The news struck him like a thunderbolt. Paris, the Trojan prince welcomed as a guest, had taken Helen, the most beautiful woman in the world, along with treasures that gleamed like the stars. Whether by seduction or abduction, the act was a violation of every law that bound the Greek world, hospitality, marriage, and the divine order upheld by Zeus himself. Menelaus's heart, once steady with love and pride, now burned with a fury that rivaled the gods' own wrath. His queen, his love, his symbol of Sparta's strength, had been stolen, and the insult was not just personal, but a wound to the honor of all Greece. The golden apple, far away in Troy, with Aphrodite's triumphant smile, had woven its final thread of discord, turning a divine rivalry into a mortal catastrophe. Menelaus wasted no time. He sent word to his brother Agamemnon, king of Mycenae, whose ambition and authority made him a natural leader among the Greeks. Agamemnon, with his piercing eyes and commanding presence, saw in this betrayal not just a slight to his brother, but an opportunity to unite the fractious kings under a single banner. The oath of Tyndareus, sworn years ago when Helen's suitors vied for her hand, now rose like a spectre, its sacred vow binding every king who had pledged to protect her marriage. The call went out across Greece, carried by swift messengers to the courts of Ithaca, Pylos, Crete, and beyond. Odysseus, cunning and reluctant, heard the summons in his island home, his mind already calculating the cost of war. Nestor, wise and aged, nodded gravely, his memories of past battles tempered by the weight of the oath. Ajax, towering and fearless, sharpened his spear, eager for the glory that war promised. Diomedes, young and fierce, rallied his warriors, his heart stirred by the call to honor. One by one, the kings of Greece answered their ships gathering at Aulis, their sails a forest of white against the azure sea. The oath of Tyndareus, once a pact to preserve peace, had become a chain that pulled nations into conflict, its strength forged in the pride and ambition of men. The gods, watching from Olympus, saw the mortal world shift, their own rivalries now mirrored in the gathering storm. Hera and Athena, their hatred for Paris and Troy unquenched, lent their divine will to the Greek cause, their vengeance a wind that filled the sails of the gathering fleet. Aphrodite, ever loyal to her chosen mortal, watched over Paris and Helen, her protection a shield that would soon be tested. Zeus, his thunderbolt still observed with a heavy silence, knowing the war he had sought to avoid was now inevitable, its seeds sown by a golden apple and a mortal's choice. The wedding of Peleus and Thetis. A distant memory of harmony was now a forgotten prelude to a tragedy that would span a decade. In Troy, Paris and Helen stood within the city's towering walls, their love a fleeting moment of light amidst the growing shadow. Priam, king of Troy, welcomed Helen as a daughter, his pride in his son's triumph blinding him to the danger she brought. Hecuba, his queen, felt a mother's unease, her dreams haunted by omens of fire and ruin. The Trojan people, dazzled by Helen's beauty, celebrated her arrival, unaware that their city was now a target, its fate tied to a divine dispute that had begun with Eris's vengeance. The golden apple, though no longer in sight, cast a long shadow, its inscription, "For the fairest, a spark," that had ignited a war that would burn for 10 years. At Aulis, the Greek fleet grew ship upon ship, their prows pointed toward Troy. Warriors sharpened their blades, priests offered sacrifices to the gods, and the air hummed with the anticipation of battle. Agamemnon, standing on the shore, his cloak billowing in the sea breeze, rallied the kings, his voice a call to honor and vengeance. Menelaus, his heart a storm of grief and rage, stood beside him, his eyes fixed on the horizon where Troy waited. The oath of Tyndareus, a vow sworn in a time of peace, now bound them to war, its weight as unyielding as the tides. The gods, their rivalries now spilling into the mortal world, watched as the stage was set for a conflict that would pit brother against brother, hero against hero, and city against city. The golden apple, a small thing forged by Eris's malice, had done its work, transforming a divine beauty contest into a mortal war. As the ships prepared to sail, their sails catching the wind, the world held its breath, the sea itself seeming to pause before the coming storm. Troy, with its proud walls, stood defiant, unaware of the armada that would soon descend upon it. Helen, the spark of this war, was both a prize and a curse, her beauty, a flame that would draw nations to their doom. The golden apple, its gleam now a memory had set in motion, a tragedy that would echo through the ages, its legacy, a tale of love, betrayal, and the unrelenting wrath of gods and men. And so, dear friends, we leave Troy standing its walls proud but shadowed by fate. A golden apple's spark has kindled love and wrath, setting gods and men on a path to war. The Greek ships gather their sails, a storm on the horizon. The world waits breathless for the clash to come. Thank you for joining us on Sleep Stories TV. If this tale stirred your heart, subscribe and tap the bell. Share your thoughts below. Who do you think will prevail? Until next time, let the stars guide your dreams.